All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to our conversation tonight on Zoom and Gloom, living a good life in the age of online socialization. Now, that may feel particularly poignant if you are a parent with small children at home. I'm Adam Gamewell, one of the co-founders of the Human Science Task Force and host of this Anthro Life podcast. Tonight, we're excited to share with you a conversation with psychologist and parenting coach Teodora Pavkovic and anthropologist Vyjayanthi. Now, to let you know about the Human Science Task Force, this is a coalition of thinkers and makers and doers across intellectual traditions whose aim it is to help those who dedicate their lives to understanding the world to have more of an impact on it. Now, our flagship product and idea is Mindshare. It's a platform and a community that helps scholars and practitioners become thought leaders by bringing their research to life through curated conversations, video essays, podcasts, and more. Now, Mindshare can help you craft your research into new kinds of media, widen your reach, and amplify your impact. So we're booking speakers and storytellers for collaborations in the fall. So if you're interested, you can please fill out the survey that will be linked in the forum to get in touch. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, if you've attended a Mindshare event before, welcome back. If you're new, this is how this will work. Teodora and Vyjayanthi will dig into tonight's topic, and y'all can post questions and comments below here in the forum, and our guests will answer the questions kind of after they've had the conversation. Now, the reason that we're using this platform versus, another video conferencing platform you might have heard of is because the conversation can live on here beyond the video. And we often have great and rich conversations with each other beyond the event itself. And so I have no doubt we're going to have a ton of really interesting ideas come up, thinking about what does it mean to be well online, living in the world of Zoom, trying to work with kids at home, or just trying to adjust to life of being online versus socializing in person is much more. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Vyjayanthi. Here we go.
We are so glad to have you and speak about a very timely, very important topic. This is Teodora Pavkovic, and she is a psychologist, a parenting coach, and a third culture kid. She has a unique perspective on human relationships and mental health in the digital age. With training in psychotherapy and a deep lifelong interest in the humanities, her work is focused on helping children and adults gain self-awareness, develop emotion regulation skills, and expand their consciousness and acceptance of self and others. In this webinar, we'll be talking about the importance of emotional diversity and how growing up surrounded by cultural diversity helped develop her empathy skills, and hopefully we will learn from your empathy skills. And my name is Vyjayanthi. I'm so excited to be here. I'm an ethnographer, anthropologist. And with that, we'll get started.
Hi, so thank you. Just want to say thank you as we begin for inviting me here, for interviewing me. Want to thank Adam and Phil as well. And I'm just really excited to be speaking to your audience of human scientists.
Great. So let's just dive in. You mentioned being a third culture kid, and that was something that was very fascinating to me. All the experiences you've had and how that kind of shaped where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So it's not that well known of a concept, I guess. I always throw it around as though everybody knows what it is. But being a third culture kid essentially means that you were born in one culture that is your native culture, the culture of your parents, and you ended up growing up in a culture that is different to that. So in my case, it was quite a contrast of two, in some ways very different cultures, but in some ways pretty similar ones. So I was born in Serbia, which is in Eastern Europe. I'm a Greek Orthodox in terms of my religion, although I'm not exceedingly religious, but I ended up growing up in the Middle East, in Kuwait, which is was at that point and still is to a great extent a pretty conservative Muslim country. And so on the surface, the two seem very, very different, and in many aspects they are. But I think one of the benefits of growing up in these very, very different cultures is being able to see kind of below the surface and digging in a little bit deeper and actually realizing how similar they are. And I think one of the ways in which growing up as a third culture kid has helped me understand people a lot better, which of course for my work as a psychologist is really important, is to realize that if you pay attention for maybe a little bit longer than you normally would, and you kind of hang around for a little bit longer, and you really stay present with people, you can see that below the surface, we're all essentially the same. We're all essentially looking for exactly the same types of things. I think we just kind of outwardly show it in slightly different ways. So our culture and our religion and our traditions and our rituals, our habits, what is socially acceptable, they dictate kind of how we seek out to fulfill these needs in slightly different ways. But I think one of the kind of the greatest benefits of growing up as a third culture kid for me has been to really realize how similar people actually are, and to realize that, again, below some of those kind of culturally, socially appropriated differences, we are all actually very, very similar. And for me, it's a message of hope as well, that kind of brings us together. And I feel like global critical moments such as the one that we're going through right now, I feel really highlights that our fears are exactly the same, our hopes are exactly the same. The things that we want on a kind of basic fundamental level are essentially the same.
So that message of sameness, similarity, underneath it all, how does that work with some of the different cultural backgrounds you might have worked with, and living in a place like New York City and having traveled so much? Is there anything that is not translatable to cultural norms that you've seen? Definitely, I see a lot of greatness in the approach of similarity and commonality, but I'd love to know if there's any nuance, a different spin to that.
Sure. Absolutely. And when I talk about the sameness, I do mean that in a very kind of very basic, fundamental kind of a way. So as we're talking about very basic psychological needs, the need to belong, the need to be accepted, the need to feel safe, the need to feel connected, all of those are the same. But then, as I said, depending on the culture that you grow up in, the way a lot of these kind of surface is very, very different. So the important thing to note there is that in terms of my approach to people, I don't ever let that kind of fundamental idea of psychological needs blind me to those nuances and to those kind of little quirks and little differences that each and every single person has. So for me, it's really important to understand the person and to know the person, to know exactly what those differences are while keeping the sameness in my mind at the same time. So that as I am helping somebody, whether it's an individual or a group, achieve whatever their goals happen to be, if it's around their identity, if it's around their relationship, if it's around their emotional health, their digital health, and all these different things, I'm keeping in mind that, for example, regardless of who they are, they need to belong. That's a given. That's not different. Whether you were born in, Russia or Canada or Peru, or it doesn't matter wherever you come from, that's always the same. But we always have to keep in mind that the way those things are kind of the way they show up is going to be different. So it can depend on religion, for example. It can, again, depend on the way we're socialized. Sometimes it can depend on our gender. It could be a lot of different things. Yeah. And so for me, I feel like my background has really helped me with that, so that if so for example, I grew up in the Middle East. So, if I have a woman come into my office who's wearing a hijab, whose head is covered, I'll know immediately that there may be certain things I need to be sensitive to. Now, I'm never going to make assumptions because having lived in the Middle East for nearly 20 years, I also met different women who wore a headscarf for different reasons. So I'm not going to make assumptions about why this woman is wearing a headscarf, but I immediately have that understanding that this is very important for her, and it's culturally important. It's important religiously as well, and so I have to be mindful of that. So it's kind of it's a kind of balancing act of keeping in mind that some of those basic essentials are exactly the same, but I'm always keeping my kind of my sensors out and my radar out for the culture that this person grew up in, what aspects of that culture they accepted, what aspects they rejected, what are their goals, do they have issues with breaking some of these expectations, or are they very much feeling rebellious in that moment? So it's really a balancing act of keeping those two things in mind.
So with the topic of digital health, just jumping right into that, how did you get into that subset of psychology?
Sure. It only happened relatively recently. So I started, I realized a few weeks ago that in September of this year will be 20 years since I started studying psychology. So it's been a very long time. So relative to that, I've been kind of interested in digital wellness or digital health for a relatively short period of time. It's been about 4 years. And so in 2016, I was still living in Singapore. I was living in Singapore before I moved to New York City. And, Southeast Asia is a place where technology is really highly valued. And so what I was starting to notice was and I was working with children at the time, I was starting to notice a lot of children around me using devices in all sorts of different settings and kind of different circumstances. Different environments, whether it was on the bus, on the subway, sitting on a bench, waiting to come in and see me where I was working at the time, whatever the case may be. And I saw a drastic increase. It just so happened that around the same time I was invited to speak at the Art Science Museum in Singapore, which is a really wonderful museum. They had an opening of an exhibit called Big Bang Data, where they were looking at the different ways in which we collect data, process data, how it impacts us as individuals, as groups, and so on. And I was invited there as a psychologist. I was the only psychologist who was speaking there to talk about kind of the potential implications of being very tech connected, but becoming increasingly human disconnected. And so 2016 kind of marked the beginning of my interest in technology. Like I said, for the most part, it started as a result of noticing children being very tech connected and me starting to wonder what exactly that may do to the kind of the parent-child connection if a device is kind of inserted or gently is starting to be inserted between the parent and the child. That was really kind of the main thing that I was questioning at that time. And of course, we still don't quite have the answers to that. We do to a certain extent, and some research has been done on that, some of it done right here in New York City, in terms of what we call it technoference. So what technoference can do to that parent-child connection. It really all revolves around being present, being attentive, being affectionate, being very attuned to what the child wants or what the child needs at that point. Of course, we can extrapolate that to any relationship. And so that applies to adults as well. What happens if you have two adults who are physically present with each other, but emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, potentially in all the different ways, are quite disconnected because they're each connected to their tech. And it's really about finding that digital balance as well. So how can we, not necessarily shun technology, because that's not necessarily the best option, but how can we still stay connected to tech, but just use it in much more kind of mindful, intentional ways so that it's not detrimental to the human connection, to the human relationship. So that's really the focus of my work, regardless of what context I'm doing it in. I always want to make sure that the human connection and the quality of that human relationship is preserved.
So when it comes to the parent-child relationship, let's go back to that.
Sure.
I'd love to know, I mean, you raised like really great questions, and of course, research is hardly ever conclusive and finished, and it's ongoing and it's shifting, and the backdrop of the pandemic is definitely influencing that. So please do speak about that. But are there any fascinating, epiphanies or insights that you had found in all of your work, from the seed of like the parent-child relationship, technoference? I'd love to hear some of those stories and insights.
Sure. I think one of the main kind of interesting things that's emerged for me is that oftentimes the tech problem that parents identify with their kids never really originates within the tech, right? So we often talk about the fact that we're blaming tech for all these horrible things, and that tech's the reason, tech's the cause. Oftentimes there are other behavioral patterns or emotional patterns that are just inherent to us, even to young kids. And tech is essentially another platform on which that plays out, on which you'll see that unraveling. And so for example, oftentimes I'll find that parents who have kids, and when the parent complains of the child using tech in an excessive way, playing games late at night for hours on end, this type of behavior will show up in other ways as well. So oftentimes these may be the kids who will like to steal a few too many extra chocolates after dinner or before dinner, as the case may be. There'll be other little traces of this kind of behavior. And I think this is one of the most important things for parents to understand, because oftentimes I think parents carry a lot of guilt anyway, whether tech is present or isn't. It doesn't matter. It's almost kind of part of the job. It's the job description for being a parent. But I think when it comes to tech, we need to be mindful of the fact that a lot of the times tech isn't the reason. It's not the cause. There are other behavioral kind of patterns there, kind of characteristics of the child, and these just may simply play out when it comes to the tech. That still doesn't mean that we're just going to kind of forget about their tech use. We still need to address that, and we still need to make sure that they aren't say 7 years old and staying up at 2 a.m. to play multiplayer games with complete strangers, right? So that's not the best use of their time. It's not the best use of their tech. But oftentimes there are signs of that kind of behavior that show up in other ways. So that's one of the interesting things that I found. A few other ones that come to mind are pieces of research that have been conducted, not by myself, but by other researchers that have shown kind of how this technoference shows up. One of the studies is to do with technoference in particular, and it made use of what we call the still face paradigm. And that was research that was carried out here in New York City. The other one, you'll have to forgive me if I'm wrong. I believe that the study was done at either Harvard or Yale. I'm not 100% sure. But they were looking at how responsive little children are. So we're talking about 1 or 2 year olds to their parents when they're playing with a tablet, as opposed to what you call kind of old fashioned toy, say, wood blocks or something like that. And you can see their video, so you can actually see this in practice. But we find that kids are a lot less responsive if they're on the tablet, playing very, very engaging games. They won't answer to their name being called by their mother. Whereas when they're playing with, wooden blocks or Play-Doh or old-fashioned toys, if their name is called by their mother, they will look up, they will be responsive immediately. The still face experiment is a really interesting one, and Dr. Tracy Dennis Tawari, who's a friend of mine and also a colleague in the digital wellness space, who's based here in New York City, took that paradigm and adjusted it a little bit. So the still face paradigm, this was an experiment done a number of years back, where a mother would be asked to look at her, again, baby or toddler, and as the baby tried to interact with the mother, she was instructed to just keep her face very still, which is why it's called the still face paradigm. So you can imagine how difficult that is. And even your face gave a little reaction, a little twitch when I said that, because, and this is empathy, by the way, in action, because we can imagine how difficult that can be for both the baby and the mother. So what Tracy and her team did at her lab was they kind of used the same principle, but they used tech. And so they instructed the mothers to sit in the room with their little children, to play with them at first, then to take their phone and to just keep looking at the phone regardless of what their child does. And again, you can see some videos of what this looked like. And you see the behavior of the child trying to engage with the mother and saying, mommy, we have to go now. Come, mommy, you're not listening to me. And they kind of keep trying to reach out for the mom's attention, becoming increasingly distressed because they realize no matter what I do, mom is not responding to me at this point. So I think, these are a few. I've picked kind of sort of random pieces of information to share with you, but I think all of them are important because I think they show us that we we need to have a cautious approach. I don't think that demonizing technology is the answer. We're not going to get anything done that way. And it's just simply unrealistic. So, we want to be able to help our kids use technology in the best way possible. We want to inform them. We want to educate them. We want to make sure that they can be kind of independent digital citizens. But at the same time, especially when we're talking about very young children, we do need to be aware of the fact that technology impacts them in a way in which, old-fashioned toys don't. And by the way, that same tech impacts us in a certain kind of a way as well. And so when I talk about that parent-child connection, that's where we need to be very cautious in terms of how we consume tech when we're around our children, because it pulls them away from us and it pulls us away from them. And I don't mean that, again, literally in that physical sense, but mentally we're seeing some research that shows us that. And so those are some of the, I paint a picture with those few pieces of information.
I love those examples. And I love that you mentioned, for example, the demonizing of technology, because we look at digital and wellness as almost like they fight against each other. Oil and water. Wellness means get away from, unplug, get away from all of the digital. And then you mentioned how it, not physically, but in every other way, pulls people apart. We hear about the isolation, loneliness, all of these things increasing because of the use. Are there, on the flip side, have you seen studies, have you done studies, or maybe you're embarking on this, where technology, the digital, is equivalent to wellness, some examples of that, because we don't often hear that. I've read studies, I've heard some things, these like animal puppy shaped robots for some elderly in certain countries. I've heard of these kind of cutting edge technologies happening. So
sure. Yeah. I think in a sense, this pandemic in a way has been the real life experiment. I think especially when it comes to telehealth. And so I know that, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers would have heard that word telehealth mentioned over the past couple of months, definitely since March, because a lot of therapists, psychotherapists, coaches, counselors have had to switch to using technology in order to deliver their services. Of course, it didn't just start now. We've had apps such as Calm. Calm is the unicorn, so it's probably the best known one. There's Headspace. There are quite a number of apps that have emerged over the past couple of years that offer different forms of psychotherapy, and seemingly with positive results. It's very hard to tell. I, for one, definitely advocate for a balanced approach, but I do tend to be very cynical when tech companies, regardless of whether their focus is on mental health, when they report their successes. So I'm always very cautious, and I always think it takes a little bit of time to actually see what the potential positive effects are. But it seems that a lot of people do appreciate having that form of access to their therapist, whether it's through text, through email, so on. As somebody who's been trained in psychotherapy, I will always stick to the fact that direct contact, one-on-one, is the best, or if not the best, it's simply the most powerful, and that's just down to neuroscience, right? It's kind of an indisputable fact. But there obviously are ways in which we can use technology to help people, especially where accessibility is a huge issue. And of course, in the United States, it really is. In many parts of the country, people simply cannot access mental health services for a number of different reasons. So I would say that's one kind of successful experiment. We're still in the process of it. Definitely. It probably is, I would say, the biggest one, or the most powerful one when it comes to wellness. Again, I mentioned a couple of the other apps, such as Calm. Calm has a huge fan base, a huge number of users. It's, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a mindfulness based or a mindfulness focused app. They've now gotten a lot of celebrities involved as well. I believe one of the most recent ones is Nicole Kidman. So if you would like to meditate with Nicole Kidman telling you a story, you can absolutely do that. And again, I think Calm's success definitely in part indicates that its consumers, its users really appreciate having access to that. So mindfulness apps are definitely one kind of piece of evidence that technology can be used for really good, for very positive things. When it comes to gaming, not of the kind that we're used to, so not things like Fortnite and Roblox necessarily, but certain types of games have been developed to help, for example, kids with autism, or children who have other types of psychological issues that just make it difficult for them to, say, to interact with other kids, or kids who have some issues with learning. So their learning styles are different than what we would call normal, although I don't like that word normal. But some of these games do seem to help kids and to resolve some of these issues. So I think there definitely are examples of how technology can be used for the good. And I do agree with you. I think that's where some of the balance or the rebalancing needs to happen. It's very easy to complain, and it's very easy to draw attention to what is negative. I do absolutely think that we need to draw attention to what is positive as well. And again, just the fact that you and I are able to speak right now, thanks to this technology, and for so many people over the past few months, it really has been a lifeline. It's what's made them less lonely and feel less isolated and feel less scared. So there are definitely examples there. It's just that we need to put in a little bit extra effort, maybe, to really try and amplify them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up all of these examples, because I feel I would love to paint, a more balanced picture. And it seems like balance is a core theme of a lot of your studies, a lot of studies that have been done across the world. So all of these truths are kind of existing simultaneously. Technology connects us and it makes us feel isolated. We need to see faces, so we use Zoom, we use StreamYard, and yet we get burnt out, So let's talk about that. The topic at hand, Zoom and doom, Let's take it on, let's keep going on this emotional roller coaster. So we talked about the positive. Now let's maybe dive back into Zoom culture and the realities of today, right?
Yeah. It's I mean, if we really kind of boil it down and again direct our attention really to the nitty gritty, to the behavioral elements of this. So and I'll just reflect it in terms of my experience right now, right? I'm essentially paying attention to maybe 4 different aspects of my screen at this point. So I'm looking at you on the one hand. As I'm doing that, I realize that the people who are watching me are then not making virtual eye contact with me. So then I direct my focus onto my webcam, because as I'm looking at my webcam, it's almost as though I'm looking into the eyes of the people who are watching me. At the same time, obviously, I can see myself. And again, this is just down to the way our brain is wired. When you see yourself, that pulls you in, it draws your attention. So you're constantly distracted by yourself. And then on the other hand, I'm also looking at the comment section and kind of our private chat to see if anything comes up there. So you're talking about 4 different directions in which I'm looking for people who are even more distracted than that. They may have their phone there, another device. Of course, we know that with so many people working from home, there may be kids popping out and pets coming out and partners and family members and all sorts of things, right? So you're talking about attention going in a lot of different ways, and our energy being drained. Our brain uses about 20% of the energy that we put in. It's a relatively small part of the body, but it uses a huge amount of energy that body ingests. And so the brain is a pretty expensive organ in that sense, and it likes to automate and habituate as much as it can, because that keeps things simple and it conserves energy, which is why it's so easy for us to form habits. It doesn't take too many repetitions, because the brain thinks, you've done it more than once, must be important, let's go to autopilot, I need to focus on something more important. So our attention and where it goes is such a big part of all of this. And like I said, at this point, mine's going in 4 different ways, which is really exhausting. And so I think that's where that Zoom fatigue, screen fatigue, being zoomed out, the Zoom and doom and Zoom and gloom, where all of that comes from, is that we're all exhausted anyway, emotionally, because we're all so worried. Many of us are scared for very, very real, legitimate reasons, this hardly anyone remains untouched by what is going on. So that is there, and it's not going anywhere. And then on top of that, we're engaging in, like you said, in connection and communication, but in this very, very strange way. Because if you and I were in the same room, I would really only be focusing on you. There'd be nothing else there that would be pulling my attention away. Whereas this way, I'm focused on so many different things. And I think that's probably the biggest reason for why we're all going through this. Now, if you picture our setup is a little bit different now, but if you keep in mind that when you're on gallery view on Zoom, depending on how many people are there, you're talking about a lot of faces, and you're talking about a lot of eyeballs that you're looking at, and you're also very aware of the fact that they're all looking at you. So you're conscious of yourself, you're conscious of the person you're speaking with, you're conscious of all these people looking at you, you're conscious of the chat, you're conscious of a lot of different things. Earlier on, we were talking about whether we're kind of centered enough in the frame. There's a lot of things going on mentally, and it's very, very mentally draining. And I think it brings us back, though, to what we were saying before, which is balance. And so what I've been saying to people is we need to find that balance between, we feel very alone and we feel very isolated, even if we're not completely alone. But a lot of people are living by themselves at this point. This is a really scary experience for them. So if you're feeling very isolated and you're feeling very alone, definitely go and do as many Zoom calls and FaceTimes as you want, because the priority is really for you to not feel alone. But once you feel that Zoom and gloom coming around and you feel that it's far too much, change that as much as you can. Either try and switch to phone calls, switch off your video, ask people if you can be muted for part of the call, whatever liberties you can take with that, absolutely do that, but not at the expense of feeling very isolated and lonely. That's another of the most kind of basic brain truths, is that isolation and social isolation, social rejection as well, are painful to human beings. We can't tolerate being alone. For people who've seen Castaway, that with Tom Hanks, that's a movie that I always bring up, and his buddy Wilson, who he kind of created out of nothing, because it's that desperation to have somebody there to connect with. And as human beings, when we don't have somebody there, we will create somebody out of an inanimate object. That's how desperately we need to be connected. So digital wellness and digital health isn't about, you were saying earlier, digital detoxes. Those can be helpful. A lot of people report that they are helpful. So I would definitely recommend people do them if they feel they will help them. But digital health, to me anyway, doesn't mean, that I remove all tech for the sake of removing all tech, and then I feel more lonely, and then I feel more depressed, and I feel even worse than I did before. It's really using it as a tool for connection. And as long as it's satisfying those needs, please go ahead and use it and zoom yourself out as much as you want. But remember that it is a very strenuous thing to engage in this way. And so any way that we can make the experience kind of easier for ourselves, I think we should definitely feel free to ask our partners, families, bosses to accommodate for some of those little tweaks.
Yeah, that's so important. When we spoke earlier, I mentioned I was zoomed out at that point, and I've been replacing phone calls so that, like you mentioned, the balance of still having that human connection, but not having my brain do so many things at once visually. I'd love to go back to your career. I mean, you mentioned what sparked the whole interest in the digital world, but I'd love to know what you were doing right before the pandemic and how your work has shifted. And please speak about any and all involvements. I know you're on some boards and then you're
Sure. Like I said, I prefer I prefer direct contact, and whether I'm working with an individual or if I'm working with a group, being there in person is just it's irreplaceable for me anyway. Especially because so much of my work really does revolve around empathy. I I can't not be empathetic, again, regardless of who I'm working with, because I'm constantly feeling people out, and constantly providing them with feedback and taking in what they're giving me in order to inform then what I'm giving back to them. And if nothing else, there's no lag when you're in person with somebody, whereas when it's a tech-based interaction, again, in terms of attention, your attention is always on, do I speak now or do I wait a little bit? So that's complicated certain things. But part of what I did, I've been working with children for a very, very long time. Like I said, I was working with kids when I was in Singapore as well. That's something that I'm not doing at this point, because I tend to work with kids who are between the ages of about 4 to 8, 4 to 9, or 10. I do work with teens as well. But when it comes to younger kids, I don't feel that I can do the work that I do with them virtually. First of all, any parent of a 5 or 6-year-old will know how difficult it is to keep that child on Zoom. And I definitely don't want to try and help parents force their kids to be on Zoom any longer than they need to be right now because of school or whatever else it is. So and that's something that I miss. So that direct kind of contact with younger children is something that I don't have at this point that I did before the pandemic, and I'm very much looking forward to being able to do that as well. That's really kind of my sweet spot when I'm with kids, and especially that age range for whatever reason. That's kind of my favorite phase of a child's development. When it comes to all the work that I've been doing with adults, that's more or less stayed the same. So part of my work is delivering workshops and talks, doing that with all sorts of different populations. So populations within the educational setting, like teachers, and professionals as well within corporate settings. And part of that work I continue to do with Singapore, even though I'm here. And I've been doing kind of remote work with Singapore since I left Singapore. So in that case, again, I'm thankful for technology because it's enabled me to do that. And so I deliver talks and workshops on topics like positive psychology, emotional wellness and emotional intelligence, talking about EMO Diversity, which was the topic of my TEDx talk, mental health issues, improving mental health, improving our ability to focus. I'm delivering one next week on that topic, on how to kind of rein in our attention, especially during this time when technology is really our lifeline. So that sort of work I've been able to continue. As you mentioned, I'm on the advisory board of a couple of different organizations. So one is called Made of Millions, which is a really wonderful US-based mental health advocacy group. And part of the work that I do with them is I do live broadcasts every Monday at 10 a.m. I'll be doing one next week as well, in case anybody would like to join us on the Made of Millions YouTube channel, where I talk about, again, some of these things that are the focus of my work. At the moment, I'm doing a series on self-care practices, and next week's one will be on self-compassion. So if anybody would like to join in and do a little self-compassion practice with me, I invite them to join us. I'm also a member of the Digital Wellness Collective, and so we do a lot of work together in terms of conceptualizing what digital wellness is, how we want to speak to the public about it, and so on. And I'm also the co-chair of the Parenting Professionals Working Group within an organization called the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood. And some of the work that we do, again, is very much aligned to how do we want to talk to parents in particular about digital wellness and about how to engage with their children around digital wellness, and really trying to put out as many resources as we can when it comes to that. So a lot of that work is still possible. But again, like I said, I really can't wait to dive in again and just to see people in person. One of the other kind of plans that was affected for me earlier on this year was a conference, a digital wellness conference that originally my partners and I my organizational partners and I wanted to deliver in person in New York City. Of course, we couldn't do that. And so last month in June, we delivered a virtual conference. It was called HUMANITECH. And our goal was really, again, to diversify the conversation around digital wellness. And we were able to do it very well. I was very happy with how the conversation went. But again, having the ability to do it in person, to get to meet everybody in person. There's just something so special about that, that, unfortunately this year we weren't able to do. So hopefully next year there'll be an opportunity to do that.
I sure hope so. Yes. Totally with you there. Can't wait to meet in person in all kinds of contexts. So that'll be great. It'll be great when things open up fully. On the topic of your TEDx talk, EMO Diversity, I really loved it. Yes. I would love to know now, in this context, not just quarantine culture, pandemic fears, but also the voices of Black Lives Matter and supporters rising up. How does EMO Diversity, the concept, the practice, perhaps the goodness of it, play into these cultural landscapes?
Right. I think it does in so many different ways. The basic idea behind this concept of EMO diversity is, again, we use the word balance a lot during our conversation so far, and it is again about balance. It's about emotional balance. We tend to kind of oversimplify, understandably so, our kind of the categorization of our emotions. We tend to say these ones are positive and these ones are negative. And we tend to have a very kind of negative relationship with our negative emotions and a really positive, kind of pleasant one with our positive ones. And what that often ends up doing from a very young age is that we have this relationship with our negative emotions where we either want to pretend they don't exist, or we want to push them away, we want to hide them, we don't really want to address them, we don't want to communicate, try and share them with other people, and we want to just try and kind of amplify and only focus on the positive ones, on the ones that are obviously very pleasant, that feel very good, that are very convenient. And so for me, the way I talk about EMO diversity and the way I try to help people practice it more is that what we want to do is balance things out. We can't remove our negative emotions. They're deeply embedded within our brains. They are a coping and survival mechanism that we've developed over hundreds of thousands of years. So they're not going anywhere, which means we need to figure out what to do with them. And the only way to resolve them is really to allow them to emerge and to be very intentional with them, and to just kind of be present with them, and figure out how we can channel them in better ways. And then on the other hand, when it comes to the more positive emotional states, we often don't realize just how many different types of positive emotional states there are. First of all, there are things like gratitude. I mentioned compassion. There's awe. There's aesthetic appreciation. There's pride. There's joy. There's so many different things. We want to try and diversify those as much as we can and really amplify them, because there's so many opportunities to experience these different things. Even now, while we're in lockdown, we need to use tech to help us out a little bit, but we can still experience these things as well. And so when it comes to any kind of difficulty or any kind of challenge that we're going through, I think when it comes to EMO diversity, that's really the way that we want to think about it and that we want to implement it. I'm sensing discomfort. I'm sensing I don't like how I feel about something, or I don't like how it's making me feel. Let's not pick up my phone immediately, or let me not try and binge watch whatever on Netflix. Let me sit with it for a little bit and try and understand what is going on. What am I feeling? Am I feeling sad? How sad am I feeling? Am I feeling misery? Am I feeling grief? Or am I feeling kind of a little bit of helplessness or hopelessness? Am I feeling afraid? What kind of fear is this? Am I feeling anger? How intense is that anger? And why am I angry? Who am I angry with? And what can I do about it? So how can I help myself in this situation? That's really what emotional regulation is about. We talk about it often when it comes to kids, but the problem is that as kids, we often don't learn how to regulate, especially those really difficult, very inconvenient, uncomfortable emotions. And I mentioned that in my TEDx talk. There's no parent who says, "Oh, I love it when my kid shows anger in the cereal aisle at the supermarket." I mean, nobody, right? It's not something you want to kind of conjure up. You want to kind of keep it away as much as possible and just be like, smile and be happy and let's sing together and pick out a cereal and then just go home, be on our way. But the problem is that as kids, then we don't learn what do I do with it when that anger comes? How do I understand it? How do I name it? What do I do with it? How do I process it? How do I communicate it to you so that it doesn't hurt you, but so that I can actually ask you for help? And that's what emotional regulation is. And these are the times that we're in right now are some of the most difficult times when it comes to emotional regulation, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of health-related issues that are happening globally, social issues, race issues, religion. If we dig in a little bit across the whole planet, there's so many things that are going on that we're not even aware of at this point. But globally, we are all going through these very, very difficult times. And I think that without being aware of our emotions and actually stopping and saying, what am I feeling right now, and why am I feeling this way, and how can I work through this? And by the way, a lot of, I talk about self-help a lot. I talk about self-care. Like I mentioned, the series that I'm doing right now with Native Millions is focused on self-care. However, I think sometimes we tend to emphasize that self far too much when it comes to self-care and make it sound as though, if I'm feeling distressed, if I just sit in a corner and meditate, it'll be fine. It'll be good. I can help myself. And if it's not working, then I only have myself to blame. So much of emotional regulation happens between two people. It doesn't just happen inside the one person. And so a huge part of understanding ourselves and our emotions and regulating our emotions is about knowing how to reach out to other people, so that if I'm feeling frustrated or angry, I know whom to call, who can help me through this, or I know whom to reach out to, who can give me some ideas for what I can do, or I know how to express it, and I know how to work through it. If I'm feeling sad, same thing. If I'm feeling afraid, whatever it is. So I think a huge part of dealing with what is going on in the world all around us right now is to really learn who are the people to whom we can reach out, and who are the people who can help us work through whatever it is that we're working through, even if it's just as listeners. They don't even have to do anything in particular, right? That pressure doesn't have to be there to do something, to fix it, to repair it. Oftentimes it's really just about having somebody reach out to who will listen to you. And oftentimes people refer to knowing what your tribe is, whatever way you want to think about it. But I think that's a huge part of emotional regulation, emotional intelligence. I think too much emphasis and responsibility is placed on ourselves to try and fix ourselves alone. Again, we're social creatures. We're naturally created to function best within tribes. A human who is alone is a human who is at an extreme risk for dying out, or at least 100,000 years ago, that was the case. And our brain developed in such a way to send out serious alarm signals every time it senses that we're alone, that we're isolated, because to us humans, that is danger. And so what I always kind of encourage people to try and do is to reach out to other people, to not feel as though you just need to sit by yourself in your room and practice mindfulness or self-compassion, or whatever it is, with your Calm app, or it doesn't matter, whichever way you prefer to do it, and then go, oh my God, but this isn't working, I'm doing it wrong, or something's not working. That's one part of it. The other part of it is really reaching out to other people and sharing those emotions too.
I love that you said that. Yeah, a lot of folks just it's wonderful that mindfulness meditation has become
absolutely
more popular, but yeah, you're right. That emphasis on you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do it yourself, heal yourself, kind of. I love that you addressed that. So
and sorry to interrupt you, but there are some cultural differences there as well. And so certain cultures find that a lot easier to do. Others find it very difficult. And so obviously in the Western world, there is this very big emphasis on just persevere and grit and resilience, and you can do it on your own, and you can make it happen. And then there's that huge amount of shame and guilt involved when you don't. And then you think, no, but I'm not doing it right, obviously, because why isn't this working? Whereas if you look at more Eastern cultures, and that's just a very kind of big generalization, it's not always East versus West, but certain cultures in the East where the community is prioritized over the individual, people find it a lot easier to cope and to emotionally regulate as a group. And they know how to reach out to other people. I feel like sometimes in the Western world, that's a lesson that we need to learn a little to be a little bit better at reaching out to other people to help us.
Definitely. Do you, are these some trends you've been seeing? Because you mentioned like the tendency towards self-healing. I mean, do you see certain trends that we should watch out for, people should watch out for kind of in themselves or people they know in these
I think
new
one
times?
of them, I think one of them is definitely that I can handle this by myself because that's the right way to do it, or that means strength, or that that means I'm mentally healthy, or that means I'm emotionally healthy. If I can just kind of do it by myself, and I would also hate for a lot of these apps to give people that impression, which is again where I think the darker side of technology comes in, which is that if I just sit by myself with that app, I'll however many weeks later I'll feel better, and a lot of people do, and a lot of these platforms are very helpful to people, especially obviously when there's a human on the other side, the therapist or the counselor. But again, that in itself is not always enough, and so that's maybe one of the biggest things that I would say to people, especially if you are somebody who is going through this pandemic alone, if you live by yourself, that you really need to reach out to other people to know who those people are. And they can be perfect strangers too, right? So again, one of the positive sides of technology is that you can go onto any platform and you can find people who are like you, or if you're looking for people who are very, very different to you, whatever your preference is, you can find people and connect with them. I saw a really beautiful example of this early on. I think it may have been in April, on Twitter, where somebody who I follow posted a comment, a tweet saying, hands up if you're feeling sad and scared and lonely and worried about this pandemic. I definitely am today. And there was a whole bunch of responses that came after that. A few were coming from people who were saying, I'm really scared because I'm all by myself in my apartment in New York City. I'm a high risk group. In case something happens to me, I'm really worried because there's nobody here. And a number of people replied saying, if you're feeling unwell, why don't you just check in with us every hour or every 2 hours or whatever it is, just tweet and we'll know that you're okay. And if you're not, and if you think about that, how profound that is, that kind of connection and that level of empathy and care shown via a piece of tech, via tech platform, somebody who you don't even know, you have no clue who this person is, what they're like, what their background is. And yet there's that humanness there that gets you to say, listen, I care about you and I'm going to check in on you every hour. And if there's something wrong with you, I'll call 911 or I'll call the doctor, I'll call your mother, it doesn't matter. So I think that's one really beautiful example of how we can use tech right now to connect. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, whatever way you can right now to really connect with other people. Do it obviously in a meaningful kind of a way. So, mindless scrolling and all of that sort of the more kind of negative tech habits, obviously try and stay away from those as much as possible because we know that those can make us feel pretty lousy as well. But really connecting with people in meaningful ways, joining groups online or following people who are practitioners in a particular field that you're really interested in, if it's art, if it's music, and just sharing that with other people. So I think that's one of the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to improving our well-being. There's a certain element of that we can and should do by ourselves, but there's a huge other space there that needs to be filled up with interactions with other people. And you really using other people as a resource.
Right. My question is, these are so wonderful to hear about present day and how we make it through the next few months. What about post-pandemic? What are your predictions, your colleagues? What is your community of psychologists in the digital space, in the digital wellness space, talking about once we come out of this spring, summer of next year, whenever that might be?
Right. I think part of making these predictions, I think to me says that people think they have the wisdom or the knowledge or the expertise or whatever it is, the telepathy, whatever, to be able to predict what will come next. I definitely don't have that level of confidence. I don't think that I can say with confidence, I think this is what will happen in 6 months, a year, 2 years. I feel like every week almost at some point has been very different. Where I've been referring to it as a roller coaster. I don't feel like we can make any long-term predictions because things are changing. I think when it comes to the digital wellness world, tech, just even without the pandemic, changes so quickly. It's very hard to know where it's going to go and what new things are going to be emerging. And so for me, the most important thing always is just to be kind of introspective and aware and connected to your own inner anchors, and to really be, again, emotionally aware and to use that as a point of reference as you move through the next, again, week or couple of weeks or month or 6 months. I think on the one hand, one thing that we've all been saying is that we're not glad any of this is happening, but we feel that one of the positive things that may emerge is that we may be reminded of how desperately we need each other and how much we need each other in a very kind of physical, direct, face-to-face kind of a way. So one of the things I think will definitely happen is that we're really just going to, I think we already are, just yearn to be with each other and to see each other physically. And that's a very positive thing for me. I'm really hoping that will happen and that we'll be able to do that in safe ways, which is just crazy to think, that we hope we'll be able to hug in a safe, hygienic kind of way in, 6 months or so. So hopefully that will happen. So I think that's when it comes to that very kind of human aspect of it. When it comes to the digital aspect of it, I think, we can't help but rely on technology at this point, even more heavily than we did before. I don't think that's going to change too much. I always say that, again, it's down to our brain structure and chemistry. It's always easier to learn something than to unlearn it. And at this point, we're really learning what it means and what it looks like to rely on tech for absolutely everything. It will be challenging to unwind that a little bit and to become a little bit less dependent on it in the aftermath. So I think that will definitely be one challenge that we're going to need to overcome. Within the organization that I mentioned earlier, the Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood, we have a couple of working groups in there that are really focused on early childhood development, education, ed tech as well, so educational technology. I think that is a very big concern for everybody. Obviously, at this point, are schools opening? Are they not opening? It's a concern for parents. It's a concern for kids, for teachers. I think for those colleagues of mine who are particularly focused on early childhood development and learning how children learn, what are the most kind of optimal ways for them to learn, they are concerned about a very heavy or an excessive reliance on technology for children to learn. There are better and worse ways of using technology for everything, really, including for education. So that's maybe perhaps one area where I think a lot of us are worried and are just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen, because kids relying on technology 100% for their learning is definitely not a good thing. Children also need to be in person. They need to be with their teachers, with other kids. There are ways of combining things, obviously, and we've all been using technology for decades at this point to do research and to connect piece of information and to connect with different people, but there needs to be a balance there. And so one of the trends that we hope we're not going to see is a very, very heavy movement in that direction of really heavily relying on ed tech. So those would be a few of them. I wouldn't, like I said, I don't pretend to be very good at predicting. I don't know where things are going to move because, like I said, things change so quickly. But I think for me, one of the biggest silver linings is that I think we all have been reminded, we've always known it, but we've been reminded of how desperately we need each other in a very immediate kind of face-to-face way. And I think that because we're so heavily reliant on technology right now, this is actually long-term going to help us in terms of our digital wellness. This will make it a lot clearer to us how much tech we're comfortable with using, what types of tech are helpful, what types are not helpful, what are the types that can really kind of nourish us and improve our well-being, and what are the kinds that are really not good for that. So it's all a big learning experience and a really big experiment.
Yeah. Well, speaking of learning, we have a question from an audience member.
Sure.
Are you inspired by any particular public intellectuals, books, or initiatives in the area of digital wellness and well-being?
I get my inspiration. I have about 10 books just kind of here laying around on my desk right now that I could show you. That I draw inspiration from a lot of different people, people who aren't even necessarily very directly connected to what I'm doing right now. But just thinking in terms of, for example, the Digital Wellness Collective, which I am a member of, the CEO, Nina Hersher, who is somebody who's been in this field for a very long time, who I would encourage everybody to just generally check out, the Digital Wellness Collective, but Nina's work as well. She's somebody who really inspires me as a leader in this space as well, especially when it comes to kind of mindful technology use, using technology in very healthy, nourishing kinds of ways. Some of the other, and these, by the way, the main people coming up for me are people who actually spoke at HUMANITECH at the Digital Wellness Conference that I organized last month, but somebody like Douglas Rushkoff, for example, who's not exactly digital wellness, but is really considered to be a thought leader when it comes to responsible technology and to humane technology. So he has a podcast called Team Human. And it is just a very interesting, incredibly uplifting, energetic person to listen to. And I was very lucky to get to hear him speak live. And to meet him as well. So he's somebody who's also incredibly inspirational. But then there are other people who are not necessarily in this field, but who I think their work is very applicable. So one of the books that I have on my desk right now is called The Art of Gathering, written by a woman called Priya Parker, who talks about how we can gather in meaningful ways. Of course, for the most part, she was talking about this in real person now that the pandemic is here. Just earlier today, I was watching an interview of hers where she was talking about how we can do that now digitally. So she's somebody whose work I was thinking about a lot as I was organizing HUMANITECH and thinking about what are the ways in which we can really create meaningful conversations, even though we're going to be online and we're going to be virtual. Members of the Center for Humane Tech, that's an organization perhaps that some of our viewers are aware of. Max Stossel, who was also one of the other guests at HUMANITECH, who is not only involved in humane technology and digital wellness, but is also a poet and an artist. And so one of the things that he does in this space is really contribute with his art and with his words. And so I would encourage everyone to check his work out. He's incredible. Marshall Davis Jones. I would encourage everyone to look him up on YouTube and look up Screen Time, because that was a poem that he composed. It was a spoken word poem in 2011, which I think is incredible that he had that amount of insight back then to realize what interacting through screens was doing to us. So I could go on and on. There's so many people who are inspirational to me. Lenore Skenazy was another person who spoke at our conference. She's very pro free range kids. She's also a New Yorker. Our viewers may know her. So there are a lot of different people. I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll keep going on. But it's a really wonderful community, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
That's great. I have never heard of the term free range kids. I don't have kids.
Yes.
Maybe that's why I
Yeah.
love that term.
Yeah.
Whatever it means, I'm just going to make up my own definition.
There you go.
But
yeah.
I want to leave it to anyone in the audience who wants to ask any last questions.
Sure.
And while they're doing that, please, if there's any other thoughts, anything else that we didn't cover, there is a link to your TEDx talk in the discussion. So for those watching, please check that out. It's really wonderful, really applicable and helpful. But yeah, anything else that you'd like us to know about your work, about ways to continue to be well in this digital age?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage anyone who would like more information about any of the things that I've talked about to get in touch if you would like any more resources, if you would like other books and things. As I mentioned, I will be going live on the Made of Millions YouTube channel on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you would like to kind of see me live or interact with me a little bit more, that's a really great way to do that. I think I would kind of bottom line encourage everyone who hasn't thought about digital wellness as one part of their wellness to start thinking about it that way. I think it's applicable in pretty much every different aspect of our lives. At this point, a few months ago, I spoke at Social Media Week, which is a really, really big annual event of the marketing world, the digital marketing world in particular. And I was, again, as I often am, the only psychologist there. And my talk was on how can we infuse digital marketing with digital wellness. And then I had a few people reach out to me afterwards who are from the marketing world, saying, I'm interested in what are you talking about? What does that look like? What does that mean? How can I create kind of projects and kind of pieces of marketing work that incorporate some of those things and incorporate things like emotional intelligence and emotional well-being and so on. So as an individual, as a company, as a researcher, as a parent, kind of whatever your role is, I would really encourage you to start thinking about how you feel about your digital consumption, kind of where you're at this point, whether it comes to your own kind of just individual well-being, or if you're more concerned about kind of some of the more macro things, such as data protection, privacy, safety. For those who are interested, tomorrow, I believe at noon Eastern time, there's going to be a congressional hearing with the big four tech companies around monopolizing the kind of global tech arena. So we're going to have Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, I believe, represented virtually, of course, since they can't meet in person. But there are a lot of different layers to digital wellness. So going from some of those big concerns in terms of our data protection and privacy that I always encourage for people to be mindful of as we're using tech, to think in terms of what are we exchanging? What's the information that we're exchanging there? I always say there's no such thing as a free app. Your personal data is how you're paying for that, right? So don't let them trick you. But it stems from there all the way down to things like doom scrolling. So I'll give you that term as well in case people are not familiar with it. We were talking about it before. So it's this endless scrolling of negative information that doesn't actually make us feel any more informed, any more calm, any better than we were before we started doing it. So all of those things encompass what it means to use technology mindfully. And that's just something that I always want to encourage people to try to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the resources. And I'm sure we'll be looking forward to hearing you speak at all the wonderful online venues that you mentioned.
Yeah.
How else might people get in touch with you?
So if you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, which is topcoaching.com. So that's TEOP coaching.com. If you go there, you'll be able to, find all the links to my social media. I tend not to post too much via kind of my blog and my newsletter. I'm a little bit more active on social media. So you'll be able to find me on Twitter. You'll be able to find me on LinkedIn as well. Those are the two ones where I'm kind of most active. I recently joined Instagram, and the jury's still out on whether I like it or not. I'm a latecomer to it, and I'm still trying to decide whether I like it or not. That's another thing I always encourage people to do. You can consent or not consent to any form of tech. You're not destined to use any of it or sentenced to it. So, but you will be able to find me on Instagram as well. So those are some of the best ways. I would say Twitter and LinkedIn is probably the best. I tend to share a lot of my thinking, my projects, any interviews such as this one on those platforms. So it's really the best way to connect. And then if you would like to send me an email or a message through any of those platforms, please feel free to. I'll always respond to you. Human to human. Great.
Human to human. Thank you so much.
Please
do get in touch and please stay in touch. We loved having you here. We also, Human Science Task Force has an event on how innovation influences higher education this Thursday. So please tune into the website for future talks, all kinds of human science, social science, behavioral science topics and experts. And my name is Vyjayanthi once again. Thank you so much, Teodora. We look forward to what you impart on us in the future. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. That's a wrap.
Thank you, guys. Good night.